Powered by Cooper Parry, the rebels of accountancy, this is the No Bull Podcast.
No Bull Podcast.
Our purpose, to disrupt, lead and make life count. We help entrepreneurial, like-minded businesses to thrive across the UK. Your podcast host, Steve Whittle.
And today, my guest is Tim Foster, who is the Head of Operations at the FA. And we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion. And I'm really hoping that by the end of the podcast, you'll have a better understanding of what could be achieved if we really take a good, hard look at what diversity and inclusion means. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to look at your own organisations and think about making some changes if you need to. We're talking to Tim because recently the FA have brought out a Football Leadership Diversity Code, where they're bringing in principles and pledges to improve their equality, diversity and inclusion. I'm also joined by April Bembridge, who is the Chief People Officer at Cooper Parry. She's working really hard to improve our diversity and inclusion and making sure that we're doing everything right. I know that working at Cooper Parry, I thought we were getting it right. I would put my hand on my heart and said, hey, I think we're nailing it. But as we scratched the surface, I started to realise that actually we could be doing things better. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're doing things good, but we could always be doing better. So without further ado, I'd like to start off by introducing April.
Thanks, Steve. Huge topic, and I'm really excited to be talking about it. I'm actually also really nervous and scared, and I'll put that out there right now. So it's the first time I've done a podcast where I felt quite anxious, and the reason for that is because it is a really sensitive subject, and I think we're all, well, not we're all, but we're scared to talk about it. We're scared of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, but have great intent. So I fundamentally believe it's a topic that we have to talk about. We have to stop it becoming taboo. And yeah, like you said, make it not even a conversation. It's just the way the world works. But we're not there yet. We're a long way off that. And so I am keen to explore what Tim's doing at the FA. I think there'll be synergies with many businesses in terms of what we can do. But yeah, I'm a little bit nervous, I'll be honest.
Wowza, I've never had anyone come on and say that they're worried or they're scared. So this is going to be brilliant. And Tim, I'd like you to introduce yourself. At Cooper Parry, our purpose is to disrupt, lead and make life count. So Tim, I'd love to know what you do to disrupt, lead and make life count.
Thanks, Steve, and hello to you, and hi, April. April, please don't be anxious. I'm sure it'll be just fine. So, Steve, you've known me going back quite a long time, and it won't be a secret to you that my lifelong passion has always been in helping people to become more active. The benefits of movement and exercise are just enormous, both physically and psychologically. And for me, I've always found it really rewarding to help people engage in exercise, and in doing so to lead happier, healthier lives. I'm lucky that football is such a massive platform to be able to influence this across the whole of England. So I hope I'm contributing to this, I guess, by helping to grow football participation in England, by disrupting traditional thinking, and helping to ensure the game truly is providing playing opportunities for all. And by for all, I mean regardless of, for example, ability, gender, ethnicity, or social background. For example, a project I'm really proud of that's been taken place over the last 3 years or so has been the setting up of a framework for our County FA's corporate governance, with a focus on modernising their structures. So, in other words, helping their decision-making bodies become more diverse so that they can best understand, empathise with and connect with their communities to deliver these equal opportunities for participation on the ground.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm intrigued as to why D&I is important to the FA. It's becoming such a hot topic in business in general. It's on everyone's minds, and the question is on everyone's lips about what they're doing. But it would be really interesting to understand from a sporting perspective, and as you say, particularly from our national game, why does it matter to the FA?
Yeah, thanks, April. It's a great question. the answer is, England's population is diverse, and this diversity is growing. And I believe this diversity is one of our nation's greatest strengths. So it's important that our national game reflects this diversity and provides equal opportunities for all to get involved in football. And when I say to get involved in football, I mean that at leadership levels, within leadership roles in the game, within administrative roles within the game, or in playing the game itself.
And Tim, I'm interested because for me, when I look at football, I look at it outwardly to the untrained eye, and it seems like quite a diverse sport anyway, and that there is a lot of diversity and inclusion compared to a lot of other sports. And so it feels like, whether intentionally or not, the FA is already leading on that. And the fact that it seemingly to me is, I think it's really interesting that you are approaching that as something that needs to be addressed, and therefore will only lead the way further, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear that there's some acknowledgement out there for some of the great work that's being done, but we can do more, and we must do more. And we've got our own benchmarks. I don't think we should compare ourselves against other sports, or such like. We're the national game. There are millions of people who participate in football in England on a weekly basis. There's over 500,000 volunteers who support the grassroots game. So we have a moral obligation to do the right thing. Sure. Leading is where we'd like to be, but doing the right thing is where we must be. So although we have done a lot of great stuff, we will continue to do more, and we must do more. We're not where we want to be in terms of diversity and inclusion. We've got great plans in place, but we need to consistently review these plans and do more, and we will.
Brilliant. I think that's a key word, isn't it? The must, actually. It's no longer maybe we should do something. I think everyone has to sit up and say, it's not enough that we accidentally do some things, or it's not enough to be playing at this. This has got to be top of the agenda, and we've got to be really intentional with it now.
Yeah, and what we do has got to be for the long term. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to stick. It's got to be permanent. Talking about a theme of a month that's a focus now, and then it dies away. So what we do, we have to be clever enough to make sure that the change that we make embeds equality, diversity and inclusion permanently for the long term. So the hard work goes in now creating these really strong foundations to deliver a more diverse game in the future.
The No Bull Podcast.
I think that's really interesting. I know that I'm trying to equate it to a business now. So when we look at Cooper Parry, and I'm limited about my knowledge of businesses, but at Cooper Parry, I joined this company thinking it was really diverse, and I was joining an organisation that was leading the way. And I still think that's true, but when you scratch the surface, there's things that we could be doing so much better. And so I liked what you said about constantly reviewing. And April, you started something here at Cooper Parry, didn't you, to try and get a better understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, we did think we were pretty good at it. It's easy to look on the surface and see and hear things and think, well, yeah, we're doing okay at this, and we don't discriminate and we don't exclude people. And it's only when you really start digging into the language that you use, the words that you put in a job advertisement, the way that you interview people, how accessible we make our workspace, how accessible we make our learning. I could go on and on and on and on. That you start to realise that, yeah, we could do a lot better at this. And we need to learn more. We need to educate ourselves. We need to ask questions. We need to ask uncomfortable questions and have uncomfortable conversations. And that's kind of what we're going through now, is a process of starting to have some of those uncomfortable conversations. So, I said I was a bit anxious about this, and purely from the perspective of that, I think we need to be. I think we need to step outside of our comfort zones and be brave with this, because any topic that is worth its salt is probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable. And we can only disrupt and lead and make life count ourselves, which is our strapline that we live by, if we put ourselves out there and be prepared to, make some mistakes. So I think that the biggest thing for me in terms of our, strategy in inverted commas, we've never been a company that's big on having lots of policies and strategies in place, but we need to be organised and coordinated in how we approach this. And a big part of that is being prepared to make mistakes. And I think for me, not judging each other for those mistakes, honest mistakes that are made with good intent. We will all do them. I have done many. I'm sure I will blunder my way through this at certain points, say the wrong thing, and people will shout at their screen as they're listening. And only recently I put a post out on LinkedIn responding to some feedback that we'd had on a new starter welcome, where we'd used the terminology to welcome these guys, and actually there were guys and girls on the new starter, done with really good intent. But we're, every day is a learning curve in this stuff, and so we're trying to take all that feedback really graciously, listen to it, learn from it, change, adapt, evolve. So that's our strategy right now: is to listen, to evolve, to adapt, to try, to make mistakes, and not do our best, because we need to do more than do our best. We need to be more intentional than that, but not be afraid to trip up, because it's going to happen, and nothing will change if we don't allow that to happen.
Yeah, and April, the first step in solving a problem is talking about the problem, isn't it?
Right.
And you're right, this is an emotive area, and some people are uncomfortable having these conversations, but you have to. We won't take the steps forward we need unless we have those uncomfortable conversations, unless we put a spotlight on this. So effort equals reward, I think. So we've got to be open, we've got to be honest, and we've got to be transparent. And I think if we can do all of that and have the conversations, then progress will happen, because I do believe the vast majority of people are extremely sensible and understand that we need to do more.
So I know that the FA have had a lot of uncomfortable conversations, and that's why you're making the changes that you're making. But what does the utopia look like? What, just from the FA's point of view, what will you achieve by being more inclusive? What do you hope it will look like in the future?
Yeah. So, well, I guess what will the FA achieve by this focus? Is the first question here. And for sure, communities united are stronger than communities divided, and football pitches can provide for these non-formal social encounters between people from all different social, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, creating this real opportunity to pull diverse communities together. So football has got an unparalleled ability to help make this happen. And there are also, as we grow participation in football in England, there are massive benefits that can be measured. There are huge socio-economic benefits of participation in our national game. Recent surveys that we've done, studies that we've done, have found that football contributes well over £10 billion worth of benefits to society in England. For example, the health benefits of people playing regular grassroots football generates around £43.5 million of cost savings to the NHS each year. And people who play football, report significantly high levels of general health, happiness, confidence and trust compared to those who do not play sport. So, there's the bigger picture here of more people playing football is good for society as a whole. And we want to build on this socio-economic impact, for example, by helping to improve the physical and mental health of the nation through football. But most importantly, in particular in the areas of ED&I, the creating of equal opportunities for everybody to play is just morally and simply the right thing to do. Our game must be inclusive for all, and we must remove barriers that prevent participation in the national game.
Wowza, yeah, that's really impressive, and I want to talk about the barriers as well. But before we ask the question about what barriers we've got to take down, I'd be really interested, April. I know you can't speak for every company, But in your view, what do we think that companies get out of getting this right, and what can we learn from the FA?
Well, it's not dissimilar really to some of the things that Tim's spoken about. And less of those kind of good for society, which I think is a really great point actually, Tim, by the way, and I'd love to kind of dig on that a little bit more in a moment. But the more diverse our workforce is, and any business's workforce is, that also breeds a much more diverse client base or customer base, because you're appealing to a much broader spectrum of people, and the difference in thought, in ideas, that come from the richness of diversity, and I mentioned before about in terms of seemingly outwardly what football looks like, and it's important to remember, isn't it, that diversity is about so much that we can't see, and it's how we foster a diverse workforce without just focusing on all the obvious things, but all those invisible things. And invisible illness is a something I'm quite passionate about myself, but how do we encourage more people with invisible illness, for example, to feel confident enough to speak openly about that and to bring their true selves to work in a different way, and that not to limit their opportunities, not to limit their ability to apply for a job, or their desire to apply for a job. So the more that we can encourage a much more diverse workforce that feels truly inclusive, people feel they can truly bring their real selves and still belong, is just going to create a massive richness of input, and that can only benefit a business. How can it not?
Powered by Cooper Parry, the No Bull podcast.
I've got a question for both of you. I don't know who wants to take this on first, but how do we decide who to include in our diversity and inclusion? For example, who decides what is right and what is wrong, even on numbers? How do we know when we've I guess I'm not wording this question very well, but what I'm trying to say is, like, for the moment it's LGBTQ month right now, and the internet is awash with companies parading out the LGBTQ community on their feed, and they're doing it this month because it's the month to celebrate it. But why is it not every month? Who decides, what should be included and what's not?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Steve. I think the point here is that, football must represent the communities that it serves. Okay, and I think that's the simple premise from which you have to look at this. We've got to be inclusive, and we've got to represent the communities that you serve, and those communities should be able to play the game. But I think a big problem here is that of blind spots, and the acknowledgement that people who are on decision-making bodies who can impact, accessibility to the game may have blind spots and unconscious incompetencies. And it's really important that the decision-making bodies engage with people from diverse backgrounds. And when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about gender diversity or ethnic diversity, although of course that is really important, but diversity of experience, background, education, community, age, belief, the list goes on. The more diverse the collective thinking is of those decision-making bodies, the smaller those blind spots will become, and the more able those bodies will be able to engage the diverse communities that they represent. So, you're talking here about less visible potential discriminations, and our county FAs do a great job of reaching out to and engaging communities, for example, in lower socioeconomic groups or for people with disabilities. We can always do more, and engage in these communities remains a huge priority. For example, we work closely with the Football Foundation, who prioritise those lower socioeconomic areas in terms of ensuring they've got facilities on which to play that are great quality and are also affordable. We're lucky the football as a sport is relatively low in terms of barriers to entry, particularly cost barriers, but we have to ensure the quality facilities are there for people to play on, and the football is affordable for all. And we've got a number of initiatives supporting the disability game. A highlight of my calendar is the Disability Cup, and I'm looking forward to the finals this July, where I'll see teams competing in the finals, which will include wheelchair football, cerebral palsy, partially sighted, blind and amputee teams. There are many opportunities for people to participate, and our Football Your Way programme is a network of centres across the country that provide opportunities to play, whether you choose to play mainstream football, pan-disability or impairment-specific football. And all of this is openly available at England Football and on the FA.com.
I literally my head was, if you could see me, my head was nodding furiously like one of those dogs in a car. Just everything really resonating there, Tim, with what you were saying. And this is why football, sport in general, it can be such a powerful, magical gateway for change, because we're talking about grassroots football here in particular, and not only creating that diversity within the social environments and encouraging inclusivity in general, what that's doing is teaching those children that take part in that sport, they're recognising that almost if diversity, hopefully as a byproduct, doesn't become such a big deal to them, because it's just so inherent in the sport, by tackling it at grassroots, that they see people from all walks of life, all educational backgrounds, all socio-economic backgrounds, as you say, that these are just people playing football together, and there's the common thread. It doesn't matter, nothing else matters, and if we can get into children, whether that's in schools, in sports, that their mindset is automatically, it doesn't matter. Imagine the world that can create then, because they're going to be our future business leaders and owners. And so, there's loads that we need to do now at our level and in businesses that exist. But by tackling grassroots at every avenue, that's where real change can happen. That's pretty special, I think.
The No Bull Podcast.
I'm hearing a lot of positive things, and this is great. When I first started looking at this podcast with Tim and you, April, I honestly thought it was going to be the bad news story. This is a problem, and we were just going to be handing that out. But actually, we're seeing lots of opportunity for good, and the FA are doing brilliantly at this. But that's not the story. When you open up a newspaper, you listen to the news, you look at a news feed on social media, it's always, we're not doing enough, there's prejudice here, and so on. So if that's the message that's been kicked out all the time, we're not going to see much change. We're always going to see a problem. So how do we tackle that to get a better message out there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Stephen. Clearly, a lot of the the conversation at the moment is around diversity of ethnicity, in particular black and mixed heritage race individuals representing football, be it playing, managing or administrating the game, and that's where the conversation is focused at the moment. And as we enter the Euros, you'll see that the England men's team does represent the diversity of our nation, and we're really proud of that. But that doesn't follow through at every level of football. And where we have gaps are not only in some areas in the playing of the game, but also particularly in the leadership roles and the coaching roles within football clubs. So you mentioned the Football Leadership Diversity Code, Steve, so that's been done specifically to help improve the diversity in clubs, particularly in those roles of senior leadership and coaching, so we can start to be more inclusive and to bring in more diverse candidates into those roles, because they are underrepresented in those roles. And we must do more. So in that Club Leadership Diversity Code, you'll see that we are looking at targets for senior leadership of 15% of appointments coming from those of a BME background, or a target reflecting the local demographic, and 30% are female. In the men's pro clubs, coaching roles, appointments should be 25% from BME backgrounds, 10% at senior hires. In coaching in the women's game, 50% of hires should be female, 15% from BME. So these are clubs that are committing, and we have over 50 clubs joined up to this code now, which is a really encouraging start, committing to achieving certain targets in diversity in their leadership and coaching teams. And I think this is where the narrative is because at the moment we aren't diverse enough as a rule at those leadership and coaching levels of the game. So this is why the code has come into place. And at Grassroots later this year, we're launching a version of the code for grassroots clubs. And remember, grassroots is where the majority of football gets played. We're talking about 17,000 clubs, 90,000 teams, 1,100 leagues. The numbers are huge. So we're going to be bringing in a version of this code for grassroots clubs that we hope will move the dial further.
Tim, I'm listening intently there and really interested by, and I think Steve alluded to it before around numbers and targets, and that's definitely I would say a Marmite subject, to quote your opening, Steve. That people have different views on whether we should have targets or not, or it's just the right person for the job, irrespective, without the targets. And we could debate all day about that, so I'm not suggesting that we do. But we have to have some targets now because we're behind the curve, and so it's important to set that in to get that. Excuse me. It's important for that to get the ball rolling. I'm quite interested, and I think businesses could perhaps learn from this in terms of how you are going about attracting, recruiting, those leadership roles and those coach roles to encourage diversity. Because from a business perspective, we're looking at things like doing blind applications, so no age, no name, no education or background, although grades for some roles are required, but no specific school or university, to try and discourage people making those unconscious biases at application stage. And then similarly, the recruitment process. And I'm just wondering if you're doing anything different that we can learn from or take on board.
Yeah, great question. So, we know that nobody wants tokenism,
mm-hmm.
and what we want are merit-based appointments, but appointments coming from a very diverse pool.
Yeah.
And in football, what as tended, I'm generalising here, but what has tended to be the case here is that recruitment is made from personal networks. So let me give an example. If I was working in a club, I would have a network of friends and colleagues. And generally, if a vacancy comes up, recommendations from those friends or colleagues would be incoming, and potentially I could end up recruiting from that list of recommendations, which is fine. But if all my friends and colleagues are like me,
mm-hmm.
If they have a similar background to me, if they've got similar education and experience to me, if they are of the same religion and belief and ethnicity as me, then guess what? We'll tend to recruit more people like me.
Sure.
So what we've got to do, and what this code is facilitating, is to have a merit-based recruitment process that makes sure we move away from these personal networks, and that we open up applicants more broadly for people from all walks of life, so that we can have a truly diverse pool of candidates to appoint from.
Powered by Cooper Parry. This is the No Bull Podcast.
When we talk about diversity and our network, if you like, that we have to improve, we're often talking about gender and I can't even say the word. We're often talking about gender and ethnicity. I could say that much better. Are the more obvious ones. But there's less visible discriminations, and I just wondered if there's, in either from the FA's point of view or from a business point of view, that we maybe tell the listeners what other things that we've seen.
Yeah, and this becomes a massive conversation, Steve, because we're talking here about discrimination, but also there are areas of diversity that aren't necessarily discrimination, but which are still having an adverse impact on decision-making bodies. For example, skills, life experience, very important areas of diversity to bring to decision-making bodies that help ensure that the decisions you reach and come to are the best they can be. So, we're doing a tremendous amount of work at the moment. I mentioned at the start a particular piece of work that had been 3 years in the making that I was particularly proud of with our county FA partners. So our county FAs, there are 50 county FAs across England, and these are our partners who are responsible for the local governance, regulation and development of the game. So these are the boots on the ground. These are the organisations that look after the coach network, the referee network, look after teams and leagues at a local level. And the FA is a body that's been around a while. The FA, as I'm sure was founded way back in 1863. So with organisations that have been around a long time, there comes a lot of tradition. And the tradition in the FA through the county FA network has been that ultimately county FAs were started kind of back at the end of the Victorian era, where sport was around amateur values. County FAs were predominantly formed by kind of ex-public kind of footballers who wanted to uphold amateur values, which was stuff like it's not the winning that matters, it's the it's the taking part that counts. It's moving away from winning at all costs. Those kind of intrinsic amateur values of sport is where the game kind of started. And county FAs, created councils and decision-making bodies based from those networks. So where we found ourselves with county FAs were that the decision-making bodies on county FAs, be it the councils or the boards when they became incorporated about 20 years ago, were traditionally dominated by older male volunteers who have the necessary spare time to commit to such duties, but who probably came from generally similar backgrounds, and where longevity of service was encouraged, creating kind of club cultures and a relative lack of diversity in background, skills, age, gender, ethnicity, and so on. But this is history that goes back 150 years, and this is how the game's evolved. So now we're saying, well, of course we hugely value the work that these volunteers have done. And remember, we're talking about volunteers here, people who give up their time because they love football, and they do a tremendous job and have done a tremendous job in getting football into the place where it is today, which is a game enjoyed by around 15 million people in England, week in, week out. But they may not be tremendously diverse as decision-making bodies because of that. So we're at this point of change now, where we're saying, of course, we want to make sure that we are moving towards a more diverse, representative group of people on these decision-making bodies that represents our local communities, whilst also saying, of course, we want to retain the skills and expertise from those that have them, who have the experience, and who have helped get the game to where it is today. And it's difficult, Steve, because we don't want these core volunteers who have done a tremendous job to feel that they're no longer welcome. And I think that is a danger for some of them as we try and drive more diversity. So we have to acknowledge the history and the skills and the experience that are there, whilst also bringing in more diverse people to help ensure that those decision-making bodies are representative of the communities that they serve. And that's where we are now. The Code of Governance is based on the Sport England Code of Governance for national governing bodies of sport in England, that sets out a number of requirements that we've adapted for football. We've actually raised the bar. So we've got a regional code of governance that clearly lays out how those decision-making structures should be set up to ensure they are truly diverse and representing the community and able to engage with, empathise with those communities that they serve. But change is difficult, right? We all know that. It's difficult to go from where we were to where we are, and we're in the middle of that right now. Change is happening, but we need to do more. We'd like some of the change to happen quicker, and we're doing lots of stuff to make sure that we do deliver quicker change to become more diverse and representative of the communities that we serve.
You're really making me smile there, Tim, because I can feel a lot of synergies actually with Cooper Parry, interestingly, in the journey that it's been on and is on. So, rooted also in the 1800s, which was a very traditional, typical accountancy firm, stereotypical accountancy firm that you would expect, and made up of a certain ilk of person and a certain academic ability and from certain backgrounds. And it's been on a huge journey, Cooper Parry, in terms of change, and continues to be on a huge journey of change. However, really important to respect, to honour the input and the value that those individuals have had that were, we've not got anybody here from the 1800s still, but we've got 5 generations of people within Cooper Parry, and within the footballing world there'll be 5, 6, maybe even 7 generations now of people. And I think what becomes really powerful is when we don't discount the value that those founding people and those we want to create. I guess what I'm trying to say, we do want to create a diversity and inclusion, but by then potentially excluding those, we're minimising the diversity that's there and the richness that they bring too. So finding a way to get those to meet and to marry in the middle. And there was I was chatting to somebody the other day. There was a really interesting study around the different generations and how actually some of those, the older generations, born 50, 60 years, 70 years ago even, actually there's some real similarities there with some of the Gen Zs that are coming through in terms of the what they want out of life. And so to assume that whether it's age, whether it's race, whether it's something more invisible, to make assumptions about what those different demographics want or need out of life is really dangerous. But by bringing them together, we create something really interesting. So I've just felt that there was some real interesting synergies there in the thinking.
Yeah, and you're right, April. And within county football associations, the problem has historically been exacerbated by the fact that kind of length of service has been, kind of almost encouraged. Mm-hmm. So the longer you sit on the council, the better, and then you might end up on the board of directors for a county FA. And good corporate governance structures recognise term limits as a cornerstone, and this can be a highly emotive area of conflict where personal agendas and self-protectionism have the potential to surface. And that can be sometimes rationalised against an argument of a backdrop of declining volunteer numbers. So, and I think this is where this is why the change can take time, because this is complex. It's not as easy as flicking a switch. People who have historically been involved in those decision-making bodies are hugely valued, but what we need to do is just to grow those decision-making bodies so that they are more diverse and more representative of the communities that they serve. And in that, some people who maybe, would like to be on those decision-making bodies may no longer be able to because of, for example, the imposing of term limits, mm-hmm. or open and transparent recruitment processes and skills-based recruitment processes. So we're going through that change now, and it's emotive, it's personal, it's difficult, but we're making good progress. So, Steve, when you say, you're hearing lots of good stuff, and it sounds like lots of great progress. It is, but we're not where we want to be yet. We'd love all of our counties to be fully compliant, with all the 65 requirements of the Code of Governance, but it's not something you can do in a week or two. It's probably one season, maybe 2 seasons work to become code compliant, because these are, a gold standard of corporate governance principles.
Gosh, I can just imagine a very difficult conversation to be had with somebody who's been the head on the board for 40 years, has done amazing stuff for his community, his whole life is football, and then we've got to go in there and say, thanks, but now you've got a term time, or you're not diverse enough, or there's a very difficult conversation to be had there, isn't there?
It's very difficult, Steve, and these volunteers have done a fantastic job. So it's really tough. But, to bring in more diverse people, you have to create the vacancies. So what term limits do, and make sure that there's a regular refreshing of people on those decision-making bodies, which gives you the opportunity to go to a diverse pool of candidates, and then based on merit and skills, recruit in from that pool. And if you've got that constant feed of new talent coming through, there's your opportunity to become more diverse. But yeah, it's really tough. People are passionate. For some people, football is their life, and having these roles is so important. Not you or I couldn't comprehend how important it is to them. So we've got to be sensitive about this. And although we are making progress, and we will continue to make progress, we must acknowledge the great work that these volunteers have done over the years to get us to where we are today, as we now take this next step forward.
The No Bull Podcast.
With communication, to make anything good happen in this subject, we need to be able to communicate effectively with each other. Now, talking about this subject is emotive, and it's so difficult, especially with the terminologies that we have to use for things. I'm always making a mistake. I used the word autistic the other day in a conversation, and I was slammed. Now, the way I see it, and I might see this wrong, is you have a small percentage of people with very loud voices who are professionally offended and shout the loudest. Then you have the other end of the spectrum, the people who are idiots, who are not diverse at all. They have prejudices, they don't care who hears about it. And then I think you've got a large proportion in the centre who are often scared of what to say, who are maybe not having the conversation because they're really worried about saying the wrong thing and offending someone, and being attacked in some way, verbally. So how do we improve that?
I mean, for me, I think communication is a key word. Communication is two-way, right? So any good conversation is where both parties are getting actively involved and having equal airtime to talk and to listen. And so for me, the critical part of communication that we've got to nail at Cooper Parry anyway is really listening. And yeah, there will be those people that are extremely passionate and want to be the first person to call somebody out when they've said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing. And I try to go through life assuming that most people do things with good intent. So even those that feel it might feel like it's an attack, verbal or written, they have some good intent there. They're wanting to educate, and so I try gracefully, not always successful, but try gracefully to accept that feedback and learn from it. And I think that's all we can do, is be really open to listening, really open to learning, and try not to be afraid of getting tripped up. And I know I've said it a few times now, but I do think the only way that change will happen, and change is painful, as we've discussed, none of this is going to happen overnight. It's a journey, it's a process, and it's like many other great causes that we're hearing a lot about now. Environmental causes. I can't remember who said it, but a quote that gets repeated often is, you need everybody doing it okay, as opposed to a handful of people doing it excellently. And it's no different with this for me. We all just need to try and work with good intent and listen to the feedback when we hear it, when we make a mistake. And the landscape is changing all the time as well. So what we say today, and there's a number of phrases, like the things that you said, the things that I put in my note, that tomorrow, that's no longer the politically correct thing to say. So with something that is so rapidly changing in a world where, as human beings, we aren't that fastly adaptable, that's tough. And so we should give ourselves a bit of a break, give each other a bit of a break, and just try and support each other through this and encourage, rather than knock each other down when we do get it wrong.
Yeah, and April, I think, for me, transparency is so important here.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you are open and honest about where you are, where you want to be, and how you're getting there, I think that takes a lot of the heat out. In the absence of information, people will often make up their own realities, and that can be really unhelpful. And that's where, rumours start and facts can be misrepresented and people misunderstand what's actually happening. So, my one key word here is transparency. I think our In Pursuit of Progress plan, which is our ED&I strategy, is a good example of how we've taken this broad, complex issue and broken it down into specific actions and measures to ensure we deliver progress. And this is freely available on the FA.com, so that we can be held to account, publicly against where we want to get to and how we're progressing in getting there. But I talked about this code of governance. There's 65 requirements. Some of those requirements are around transparency. Transparency of process in terms of appointing people onto these decision-making structures. Transparency of what happens in board meetings and council meetings, and making sure people can see the minutes and what's being discussed. So, yeah, I just repeat, transparency is key here. If you're open and honest, I think you take away a lot of the mischief that can be made through misinterpretation of the facts, or people trying to drive an unhelpful agenda.
I think that's a great takeaway.
Fantastic takeaway. I couldn't have said it better myself. But to wrap up, I think what we're saying is that we need to establish where we are in our organisations, set ourselves some very clear guidelines, be honest and transparent about what we find. Don't be offended by it. Have open conversation. And I loved April, what you said there, reminding us all that it's better that the majority of us are doing okay rather than just a few of us doing excellent. Tim, we always ask our guests to give us a 30-second overview. What's the most important thing in 30 seconds for you about inclusivity?
I think, the thing about being inclusive is making sure you can reach out and engage those communities that you need to serve, and be aware that you will have blind spots that you are not aware of, and the way to open out those blind spots and put a spotlight onto them is to have the greatest diversity you can have on your decision-making bodies, that will enable you from a skills point of view, from a gender point of view, from an ethnicity, from a religion, from a belief, point of view, to reach out, understand, empathise with and engage those communities that you represent. It's okay that you don't know everything, but what you have to do is know that you don't know everything and do something about it, and that comes through diverse recruitment onto the decision-making structures.
Wowza, that's fantastic. And April, I want to give you the final say on your reflection, and
I always have
we'll
to
take it
follow
from
these.
there.
I always have to follow these really great elevator pitches. I'll keep mine really brief. I think for me, it's a note to something that you said earlier, Steve. But essentially, we are who we surround ourselves with, and therefore, the more diverse the people that we surround ourselves with, the more diverse we are as a human being, the more interesting we are, the broader decisions we'll be able to make, the more that we can give back to the world by being a richer, more diverse human being. So if we do it only for that reason, then that's got to be a winner as well.
Thank you, Tim and April. This has been amazing for me, and I'm hoping for the listener you've been able to take something away, maybe look at your own companies and maybe your own company, and be able to make some really great decisions to get the most out of your own businesses. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, April. It's been absolutely fantastic.
No, thank you. Good to chat, Tim.
Yeah, cheers, April. That was great. Thanks, Steve-O.
You've been listening to the No Bull podcast. Share your thoughts. Find us on LinkedIn and send us a message. And subscribe to get notified of future episodes.